Welcome everyone to our session on the next European Union budget. My name is Zsolt Darvas, Senior Fellow at Bruegel, and I'm really delighted and honored to chair this discussion with three really prominent and distinguished speakers. Giancarlo Corsetti, professor from the European University Institute, Stefani Rizzo, who is the Director General for the DG Budget at the European Commission, and Stefan Inhoff, who is the Secretary General of the Ministry of Finance in Austria. And we are very pleased that there is such a great interest, and I'm sorry to see that many of you don't have a chair, but obliged to stay. But I think this great interest also indicates that the topic we are going to discuss this afternoon is really crucial for the future of the European Union. In every 7 years, so far, as you know, the multi-annual budget for the European Union is typically lasts for 7 years. There's a long discussion, starting with a Commission proposal, which was made in July this year. And as I recall the previous rounds, these discussions always lasted almost till the last minute, so typically more than 2 years. We are just the beginning of this 2-year period. And since the Commission published its proposal in the middle of the summer, I think the discussions in various circles are about to start. So we are just at the beginning of a relatively long process. And I very much hope that also our discussion today here will help us to understand better and maybe to share some ideas for the upcoming discussions. I sought to structure our discussion in 2 main rounds, so-called going from vision to reality. So in the first round, asked our distinguished panelists to think freely, imagine that there was no EU budget so far, and what ideal budget they would envision for the European Union. Now, obviously, to still stay somewhat at the level of reality, I asked them to consider the current institutional setup of the European Union, namely that, the EU treaties regulate what are the competencies of the EU, what are shared competencies, what are the competencies of member states. So it wouldn't be completely wishful thinking, if I can say it that way. But still, I think it would be interesting to start with, if there were no EU budget so far, how would we structure an EU budget in terms of both its size, its composition, and financing? And after we gain some vision from there, we would go to reality, namely to the proposal of the European Commission, which has received many critics. I was, for example, following the presentation in the European Parliament, my Commissioner Serafin, and the parliamentary members were extremely critical. Then we also heard many representatives from member states that they were also extremely critical. So you might say, if a proposal makes everyone unhappy, then it must be a great proposal. And in fact, my own assessment was that the proposal, in fact, goes to the right direction in many aspects. But my personal view was that it doesn't go far enough. But the goal here is not to present my personal view, but to hear from our distinguished panelists. So first, I would ask Professor Corsetti, who is from a university, to give us an academic view on how an ideal EU budget would look like. The floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me to this panel, of which I'm clearly not the expert in the nitty-gritty of the budget, but I'm more of an external observer. I will work on it with Marco Buti. We are doing this Florence report with a large chapter on the budget. If you want to see the nitty-gritty, I guess we'll go there. Today I want to talk about something different, asking the question not so much what would be the ideal budget, but what would be an exercise of optimization given the constraints. And identifying the constraints usually is what really makes you free to see feasible solutions. So this morning, Jeronin was talking about carnivores and asked the question whether Europe should be a carnivore among carnivores. I think it's not very good in biology. There are herbivores that are very dangerous. The auroch, no, unfortunately extinct, was a taurus, was a cow who could be very fearful, no, could elicit fear in carnivores. So if you ask myself a question about how do you envision the EU, a long time ago I gave an interview and the journalist was shocked, say I envision as a cow. And I should say a auroch, so an herbivore able to guarantee his own survival, the survival of the species, and prosper. So what would be the budget of an herbivore here that is able to defend his way of, her way of life? So this is clearly a small budget, what we see. There is a constraint there. And it's clearly a budget with a vision. If you read the document of the Commission, there is a jump in the way the budget is envisioned relative to the contingencies which will be unavoidable around the corner. So it cannot be a plan that is rigid. So the need for flexibility is a budget that is small but marks direction of change, which is important, less redistribution of the old style, maybe new cohesion redistribution, which is something different, more human capital, more attention to the single market and productivity, and innovation, and European public goods, a little bit reluctant on going into financing and defense for different reasons. So if I want to see the constraint and abstract from the European Commission and look at what happened in the last decades, one thing that is defining Europe is the big rebalancing of risk. You may have noticed that in the last 20 years, equity premia in the US were vastly above everywhere else in the world. It was good luck, it was good production, but it was risk. There is a sense in which investors are pricing long-run risk in the US. You see it in the equity premia. You see it in the convenience yield on treasuries. Convenience yield, they were large 20 years ago, smaller. On the 10 years now, they're basically zero, even negative. So there is a reshuffling, rebalancing of risk, which to me raised the question, is this an opportunity for Europe to rethink finance, or is it the premise of a problem? Like this rebalancing of risk. If we are not ready to manage it, it could be a problem for Europe because it will create again a polarization. It's very clear. You get strong long-run risk in the US, and you see it in the treasuries. For the longest time, the dollar did not suffer. Now the dollar is getting into it. Second, we are living in a world of strong industrial reorganization. The world is dominated by a few large companies, and these large companies will seek even more political power. This will be true in the US, but it will be true in Europe. So, you see, the budget counts there because it is something that is related to the way in which we defend our single market, we defend our investment, we make saving investment possible. I don't know whether, if you look at the world trade, you have just a handful of companies. If you look at product level for the UN data, you know, at product level, you have 2, 3, 4 exporters between destination or origin and destination. That those 4 exporters will be changing their pricing. Some of them will exit with tariffs, some of them will enter. So all this will go straight into Europe, and the budget is an instrument to govern this process. Last bit, we survived 5 years, 6 years of tremendous shocks with no financial crisis, which has been a great achievement. But risk has accumulated somewhere else. Right? We know that there is public debt that is higher. We know that there is non-banking intermediaries. Now we also have the digital aspect that are coming in. So what is the ideal budget? And I finish at this round. An ideal budget is something in the spirit of the Commission that, despite being small, has very clear idea that these things will happen. We'll have a strong industrial organization. we'll have opportunities to launch something that could be, I don't know how to call it, save us, a Eurobond, whatever. It is unclear to me how we can have a capital market union without it. But maybe you are smarter. I don't know. I don't know how to quantify the effect. But all I see is that, again, despite the constraint of not being able to increase the budget that much, that was the common problem, given also the increasing demand on public sector, I think that these 2 or 3 aspects, which is the accumulation of risk, the industrial organization, and the rebalancing of risk, is what may give us an idea of where to put the money or where to put the expandable money, because the idea of the budget was to say there must be instruments such that with the coordination of national sovereign member states and private sector, we can go from 0 to 100 in a very... And I finish with just one word. We don't want a repeat of 2010, 2012, right? There is nothing wrong with heterogeneity in Europe. We can be different. Actually, I always thought that diversity can be an asset. What we don't want is the fragmentation of the type in which basically markets and politics are free to diverge without bound.
Many thanks for this bird-eye view and highlighting various risks and issues that the EU budget might tackle. Now let me turn to Mr. Imhoff from Austria. At least in the past, if I recall well, Austria was more on the side of restraining the EU budget. So I wonder that from either your perspective or the perspective of your government, how could you imagine an ideal budget for the European Union?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here and to talk about money. Well, first of all, I think maybe the question you really asked might actually be the second round, on the proposal we got. When we talk about the ideal budget, I might dare to say some things that are maybe go a bit further than just the Austrian position on the current proposal. But let me start with saying that the MFF is one of the instruments that we've got in the European Union to transform political priorities into policy. It's not the only one. It's very important, but it's not the only one. And I think the very important question that Professor Cossetti has posed in asking how do we deal with risk is not only a question about money or a question about how we design our budget. It goes much further into the instruments that we use beyond the MFF in the European Union. So we should never forget that, but without neglecting the importance of the MFF. Then I think on the ideal budget, lots of the things we got in the MFF and we had in the past, obviously are elements of this ideal approach. It's never ideal, of course, but we have to think about European public goods. This is about everything that is cross-border activities, cross-border investment. We have to think about energy. We have to think about mobility. So we have to think about cross-border infrastructure. We have to respond to climate change. We have to think about competitiveness. So we have to use the budget for things that are common to all member states in the European Union. If they're not common, we should better deal with it in the member states. This is one of the first principles I think we can actually use. This is subsidiarity. You will be familiar when you follow Austrian positions in the past that not only restraint but subsidiarity was very important, and this remains important to the overall structure of any common budget in the European Union. Then I think, of course, in common interest also includes some elements of fiscal equalization. Of course, we have to use the European budget in order to ensure convergence of those regions that currently still lag. So this is an important element of an ideal MFF as well. And then we have to use some money probably for our foreign policy activities. So it is important that the European Union plays a role in the world, and we have to use some money of the budget for that as well. So I think I leave it with these on the expenditure side, because I think you can spend a whole lot of money on these things sort of I mentioned, and I think there are some other things sort of we might be able sort of to spend less, but I'm going to talk about that maybe in the second round. On the revenue side, I think this is something, you know, we in economics we talk about fiscal equivalence. Of course, we cannot really sort of define this in a European way, or perfect European way, but we can come close to it. So the best example is obviously custom duties. This is something that we generate, sort of being sort of a single market and customs union. And I think we have to think, when we think about sort of financing, apart from contributions based on the current sort of economic capacities of the member states, we have to think about this type of sort of what I would call sort of genuine sort of own resources. And genuine own resources I would describe as money that is generated only because, or can only be generated because the European Union exists, if you want to. Okay, so it relates to the benefits of the common market. It relates to things that happen at our borders and things like that. So this would be something like the ideal way of thinking about the revenue side. Said all this, I mean, of course, the actual MFF has never resembled the ideal MFF, although sort of elements of it have been in it. This has to be the case because, as so many things in the world, sort of the MFF is not defined by economics but by history. What we deal with is something that simply is there, and sort of we try to deal with it. The good news is that we sort of policymakers that deal with budgets know how to deal with historic history and legacies. Things don't have to be perfect in order for us to be able to develop policies upon it. So to conclude, I think sort of when we think about a budget, we should always sort of try to stick to what I would call first principles. You know? And this is a good starting point to think about any budget, be it European or a budget in the member states, or subsidiarity, for example, it would be something like that. And then just to the last thing I say, sort of the principle of the more the merrier is not among the first principles. Just to confirm what you were saying at the very beginning. Thank you very much for this round.
Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of first principles and also listing many of them. I would also be curious to hear your view, what to spend less on the second round, as you already indicated. But before that, let's go to Stephanie. I mean, you may say that the Commission proposal is the ideal proposal. So I don't know whether you want to say that, or you can say something what would your ideal budget be. But in any case, we are eager to hear what you are going to tell us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. We were together last year discussing a bit what should actually be the principles for the next budget, drawing lessons on the last years, and trying to see what are the trends that we should build on. Ideal is a bit the same as beautiful. It very much depends on your preferences. So as we have already experimented, you ask 3 people, you have at least 3 answers. So I think it's very, very difficult to say what ideal is. What we should at least try to say is what the EU budget should do as a must. Must is not always ideal, but we have to make sure, and that is, I think, the first principle, that the EU budget focuses on what it should focus. And I think I can relate to quite a number of the things that have been said already. It has, in my view, and I think in everybody's view, 2 main functions. The one has been mentioned already on financing European public good. That's a complete no-brainer. The EU budget should primarily be there to actually finance things that would not be financed without the EU budget. So these are things that benefit everybody, but would be financed by only a few of them. so no one gets into that. This typically cross-border, for example, or even projects that are needed in one country, but that would benefit another country, like pipelines or energy grid or these kind of things. It should finance things that are better financed at the EU level, because that's cheaper, or because we do better, or because we need less. Typically energy infrastructure, transport infrastructure, but also, you mentioned it, things that can only be achieved or better achieved when the EU comes together, international partnerships, but also space, big projects, all this that we all know. It should also finance or support or incentivize, which are two different things, and I think we find a number of those elements in the proposal of the Commission. Actions at the member state level and at the regional level that are needed for the EU as a whole to perform better. And this is something which is very important, because there are things that need to be done and can be done at the EU level to ensure the EU is functioning better, but there are also many things that have to be done at the member state level, at the regional level, for the EU to perform better. If you think about the single market, this is the classical example of that, but also preparedness, for example. Preparedness is as strong as the weakest spot you have in the EU. I think we went through the traumatic experience of COVID, but this is also very much true for animal health or any other human health. So these are the classical things that everybody agree on. Then there is a new thing, which has taken more time to agree on, which is the role of the EU budget in crisis response. And you mentioned asymmetric shock already, Professor Cossetti. I think in the last 5-6 years, we didn't have to answer this question, because most of them were symmetric shocks that we had. And I think the EU budget in this context has developed a real capacity to become a crisis answer tool in a quite effective way. And we should reflect on this role in the very different world we're in today. Because I agree very much that the EU budget has been driven mainly by history. But today's world is extremely different from the world we have known, at least in the last decades. And we should, and this is what we argued last year, we should pause, reflect, and indeed seize the opportunity of the current challenges that we all know, to actually redesign the EU budget to be fit in this new world. And so I think the ideal budget is something that we don't really know. Why? Because the ideal budget should be a budget which is strong enough for today's challenges. But as you said, this budget, and that this is a very specific feature of the EU budget, it's not annual. It's for 7 years. And we don't know what happens in 7 years. If we look back 7 years, we're in a different world. I mean, even if we look back 2 years, we're in a different world. And let me stop there. And so the reality is the ideal budget is a budget which is conceived to help member states and their regions, our citizens, our business, to actually take the longer-term perspective, and that's the reason why it's a long-term budget, but also adapt to the changes in the realities that have increased in speed in a completely dramatic way. And this is this trade-off that in today's budget is not adequate. Today's budget, we all know, 90% pre-allocated the day you agreed for 7 years, extremely difficult to move, very, very small margins, extremely rigid, and quite slow in implementation. Not the fault of anyone, not that anybody is slow or not doing his homework, just because of the structure of the current EU budget. So while we all agree today, I think, on what the budget should be financing, what the challenges are, and the need for flexibility, this is, I would say, the degree 0 of the design of the EU budget yet. Because this is it used to be difficult, actually, to agree on the challenges and the solutions. Today, I think it's much more consensual. So that's not the difficult part of the reality in the second session. But the difficult part is, while we all agree what the EU budget, the MFF, should be doing, while we all agree that we need more agility, more flexibility in how the budget should actually adapt and be fit for this new world, what it means concretely, what is the design, what's the composition, and what's the financing remain very much not consensual. And so for the ideal budget, within still the constraints, because I think, complete blue sky thinking will not help anyone, well, that's our proposal, indeed. We've been thinking hard about, and I think we have done this quite amazing endeavor to try to detach ourselves from history, to try to stick as much as possible to what we know, and to project ourselves in a world that we don't know what it will be. And I think that is the major innovation in the proposal we made. We have tried to move the budget from a very static view, from history and from pre-allocation, into a less static world in a more adaptable budget. So that's, for us, an ideal budget is one that is evolving and will be able to continue to evolve. I think that's the ideal EU budget today.
I think you can immediately go to the second round, and there we start with you, because I think you raised indeed expectations that this new proposal solves all the past problems of the budget, so it's less static, much more focused on new priorities. Its financing is much more aligned with first principles. So if you could try to elaborate relatively briefly, what are the key elements of the proposal which meets all of these criteria that you mentioned? I think that would be a good start for the second round. And let me already indicate that in the last 20-25 minutes, maybe last 20 now, I will open the floor for questions and comments, both for those who are in the room, but also those who are online. Please go to Slido and type MFF, sorry. So it's very simple, just 3 letters, MFF. And here I have an iPad in front of me, and I will also check some of the questions. But Stephanie, back to you.
Yeah, so the MFF proposal is a very broad proposal. So to go short, I will go short, and I think everybody had the time to read it. I was very happy to say that you've read it. It's the beginning of the conversation, but it's not really the beginning of the conversation in the sense that we had been discussing these issues quite some time ago, and it's probably the first time that the MFF is attracting so much interest. So I think that's first success of this proposal. Okay, what have we presented? We've presented a proposal for starting in 2028, finishing in 2034. We say that our proposal is for a smarter, sharper, and larger EU budget. Larger in scale, we are close to 2 trillion in current prices, so nominal terms. That's 126% of EU GNI, the largest ever proposed budget. Our proposal hinges on a fundamental principle. We believe that we need a larger budget because the challenges we're facing are larger, are bigger. We believe that because most of the challenges, if not all the challenges the EU is facing today are at the EU dimension, security, defense, competitiveness, climate change, preparedness, you name it, are all at the EU level. The EU budget has to step in more than in the past. So that's our call for a larger budget. But in order for us to dare proposing a larger budget, we have made an extraordinary effort to actually review the functioning of the budget, to be able, I hope, to defend our proposal that every single euro that we're proposing to spend at the EU level will actually serve EU priorities. Sharper in priorities and more flexible. That's probably the two main features of this budget. Today, I was saying it, we have a way too rigid system, 90% pre-allocated, everything fixed for 7 years, on the day you agree it. And by the functioning of it, by the programming of it, by the fact that you pay on invoices, all that, it is very slow in implementation. So today, in 2025, we are just starting to actually implement the programs agreed in 2020 in some of the policies, which means that the priorities we had at the time might not be the priorities we would have decided today. So the objective of this proposal was to bring closer the priority setting, the implementation, and the disbursement of the EU budget. Another element, fundamental element of this budget was mentioned already, is flexibility. Now, I want to make one thing very clear. Flexibility is not crisis management. Flexibility is for the known unknowns. We know things happen. We know we have wildfires in summer, sometimes even in winter now. We have floods. We have all those things that we know happen and for which we will need flexibility. But we also need instruments for crisis management. I think that is the one lesson for the last 5 or 6 years. And we need to distinguish the two. The two are needed. So what we've done in this proposal is to build flexibility at each level, each layer of this proposal. We have reduced headings, so these are the big boxes of the MFF, from 7 to 4. We have reduced programs from 52 to 16. Why? Because in that case, less is actually more. And so here, we need to reduce the architectural rigidity of this MFF. If you have 5 programs, you are less flexible than if you have 1 program. That is a complete no-brainer. And so that we started with that. So less boxes, more flexibility for the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission to adapt to the new priorities that will inevitably emerge. We have built flexibility. It's a strong call. It's not the first time we call for it, but probably the strongest call that has been made on the non-allocation of resources in the programs, typically in the national and regional partnership program. So the first heading, the main program of the first heading, we say we need to put aside 25% of the resources. We should not program these resources before midterm at least. We've done that before with no success. We'll try again. We have increased the margins, we have increased the cushions, we have increased the possibility to recourse to money, which has not destination on day one, so that when we need it, we can access. And then we are proposing this new crisis mechanism. So this new crisis mechanism, what is it? It's an agreement, strongest governance ever, because this is unanimity of member states, this is consent of the European Parliament, this is national ratification, in which we say we know that we will be facing crises, and we decide collectively that we could access up to 0.25% of GNI, or 395 billion in current prices, in loans. So the EU could support its member states with loans for the next crisis. We don't define the crisis, because if you define the crisis now, you're 100% sure to get it wrong. No one had forecasted COVID or the war in Ukraine, though we can discuss that, and all the difficulties we are in. So let's not define crisis. We don't know the source of the next crisis, but we know that the next crisis will happen. So we equip ourselves with this capacity. That's one big feature of this proposal: the flexibility, the agility, the capacity to have this budget evolve according to changing situation and respond to crisis. Second big feature of this proposal is the no one size fits all. So more agility with our programs. Today, our programs are fundamentally based on quite detailed prescription that apply the same to all our member states or the same to all our regions. So whether you are a northern region of Poland or a southern region of Portugal, you face the same thematic concentration, the same need to allocate the same percentage of your envelope to an objective. We want to move away from that. And by moving away from the program-based budget to a policy-based budget, we provide more agility. How would that work? In principle, we set the EU priorities, and the EU priorities are well known. We inform the member states and the regions on what we, collectively, the Commission, the Council, the Parliament, see as weaknesses or elements that need to be fixed. And then we let the member state and the region decide on their own program for investment and reforms to achieve those objectives. This is strong subsidiarity, as you mentioned, because it allows the local level, the regional level, the member states to actually propose and design their investment and reforms, taking into account their starting point. Not all our regions are facing the same challenges for climate change. They all face the challenge of climate change, but their solution is not the same. And we should allow them to actually propose what is best fit for them. So that's one big change. The other big change is that we concentrate the different funds into one program to make sure that when the programs are designed, you actually benefit from the synergies of the different policies objectives, or you have to address the trade-offs that actually emerge from those different objectives. This is very different from what we've done before. This is one of the most criticized elements of the proposal. I think there is a lot of pedagogy that needs to be done here to explain, because I think there is still a lot of misunderstanding on this element. But I think this is critical that we understand that this proposal is A, more subsidiarity, so the same role of the regions, but more opportunity to actually take into account your starting point. B, fundamentally targeted on EU priorities. If you're not proposing something that serves the EU priorities, it will not be accepted to be funded by EU money, and that is just normal. And with strong controls on how the money is spent, and only spent if the objectives are met. So this is a fundamental change from payment on invoices to payment on results, or payment on objectives met. Second big innovation of this proposal is the European Competitiveness Fund. Here, the same logic that we regroup the different programs to have larger capacity to help support our business. The main innovations there are the fact that we want to drastically simplify the life of the project holders. So instead of having to face different rules for different programs depending on your level of development, the project holders will know and will evolve in one set of rules, whether you're a startup or a mid-cap, or whether you're closer to a larger enterprise. If you want to access EU funding, you will be in one world. And what we want to do here, and I think I don't have to explain why, it was all very well explained in the Draghi report, we want to tackle the one strong weakness we have in the EU, which is scaling up. So we're good at research, we are very good at patent, we are one of the leading nations, if I can call us like this, in patent and innovation, in ideas, but we're not so good, not to say bad, in actually getting this project closer to market. And the European Competitiveness Fund is focused on that. It is the scale-up answer of the European Commission to the Draghi recommendation. So what we do, we set up 4 windows: defense, security, and space, clean transition and decarbonization, digital, health, biotech, agriculture, and bioeconomy. These are the big challenges we have. This is where the critical technologies will have to emerge, and we want to support and to help those critical technologies to be deployed in Europe by allowing our project holders to evolve there. I'm finishing. That's the very same idea for the Global Fund. We basically bundle all the tools in one toolbox, and we made it available to the different geographies to make sure it's a complete no-brainer that we can switch from one instrument to another when the situation on the ground evolves. Of course, we do something specific for Ukraine, because Ukraine, no one knows what's going to happen. So we want to demonstrate that we'll continue to support Ukraine, but we don't already say how exactly. The size increased because the challenges have increased, as I said, but it's a responsible budget because the increase in the size that we are proposing should be financed by the new own resources that we are proposing, with the objective to keep a national contribution stable, because we know that our member states are facing quite difficult public finances situation. It's hard to be quick.
Thank you so much. Indeed, I ask you the almost impossible job of summarizing the key features of this several hundred pages long proposals, or maybe even thousands. So time is running. I still would like to hear from Stefan and Giancarlo what their views are. So Stefan, you made a fantastic job so doing that. Now, question whether, starting with Stefan, whether we are indeed convinced that every euro in the new budget will serve European priorities, and what changes you would propose to make this an acceptable proposal.
Well, after this, I'm beginning to understand how tough these negotiations are going to be. So, but let me maybe start with this. I think it's, as you know, this is a process that is at the very beginning. So it's a bit early to say anything particularly interesting from a member state's point of view, I'm afraid. So let me be boring. First thing is this won't be it. So this proposal won't be what we are going to agree on finally. I think this is very clear. The second thing is that everybody will have to move. This is also clear. And the third thing, and this is very important, I think, for everybody, is that there will be a deal. There has always been a deal, and we're going to manage to have a deal this time as well. So that's the good news. On the positive side, I think from an Austrian point of view, we are very much open and very welcome the idea of having more flexibility. I find your argument of the need for more flexibility especially convincing when you talk about the multi-annual framework. So we have to be prepared to show flexibility over a 7 years period. In fact, as we know, it's actually a longer period before we actually get all the budget implemented. So what we hope also getting with this flexibility is that the consolidation of these programs leads to more efficiency. So I think this is an opportunity to see what programs we actually need, which ones can we merge or improve. And then obviously what we like, because that's something we started very early, is outcome or performance-based budgeting. Austria is, with its budget laws that are, in the meantime, I think more than 10 years old, so it's from 2013. So we started with that, and we've got very good experience with that. So we very much appreciate that, but we have to be careful of not having the really bad combination of introducing outcome-based approach at the same time keeping with the current cost-based approach. So we have to be careful that we find the right balance here, to ensure a rule-based implementation on the one hand, and on the other hand, the simplification actually to get the benefits of that. That is the key positive aspects, I'd say. On the negative side, this is now really boring, but it's really important. This is too big. There's too much money in it. So the overall envelope, and I said, this won't happen. And I think, especially now that member states are simply not in a position to increase budgets. Austria, like many other member states, is in a very tough spending cut procedure, very tough budget consolidation process in an excessive deficit procedure. So we have to cut our spending actually, and that's why it is. I totally lack imagination to see how we cut down on national expenditure and increase the EU budget. So I think there is something we will see some movement for sure. On specific things, I think also you mentioned it, that simplification is such an important element of this, that we would also expect to see this being reflected in the in administration costs. So we in Austria we cut down a lot in the administration, both in terms of staff and expenditure. So I think it is important to be quite clear that this is something that so many member states face these challenges. We would expect this sort of to be taken up by the European Union institutions as well. Then on specific things on own resources, I mentioned it before. I think we are quite open to that. So there are a lot of good ideas. We are open for the reduction of the retention rate in custom duties. We find the idea of a handling fee interesting. So there are quite a lot of things that I think we can think about. We are very interested in sort of stepping up efforts in anti-fraud measures. And we are happy sort of to see that this is a priority of the Commission as well. So we think there are a lot of good things in this. Generally on own resources, and I think this reflects a little bit to what I said in the first round, is that I think when we think about own resources, then we have to think about good own resources. So I prefer sort of GNI contributions to bad own resources, if you want so. But as said before, sort of we are very open sort of to think about that, but not in the way, as you said, sort of in order sort of to compensate for the increase of the overall budget, but obviously sort of to replace our GNI contribution. Let me maybe leave it here because I think we are running out of time. So thank you.
Yeah, but before going to Giancarlo, let me challenge you a bit on the size. So I mean, you rightly said that many EU countries are in the face of fiscal consolidation, but effectively the Commission proposal would increase the size of the MFF from 1.1% to 1.26%. So the increase is 0.16% approximately, which is obviously not nothing, but not a big amount. And most of it will anyway be used for the repayment of next generation EU debt. So the effective increase in spending is just minuscule. And my question to you, whether you think that Mario Draghi report was right that the EU faces a huge investment gap, and whether you think the EU budget should, at least a small role of that, should also go to the EU budget, because if you think that there is an investment gap and it's a small portion of that should be paid by the EU budget, then we should have seen a much bigger increase in the budget. And in fact, my questions to Stephanie would have been why you haven't proposed a much bigger increase. But let's keep that for the final discussion. But if you can briefly respond to this point of this minuscule increase and why is it such a big issue?
I think I totally agree on the existence of this investment gap. It's just not a pure sort of European sort of cross-border infrastructure investment gap. So we invest a lot on the national level as well, and there's a huge gap there in every single European member state. So this does not necessarily need an increase in the overall budget envelope. If you say the increase is small, I think if I showed you the lists of consolidation measures that we implement in Austria, we are talking about 4-digit sort of items. So we talk about a few thousand euros, which we actually look into. So if you say that 0.1, 0.2% of the GDP is small, I tell you that we have lists of items where I save things that cost 10,000 euros. So the answer to the main question is I don't think that 0.2% of the GDP is not a lot of money. So it is a lot of money, and sort of that's why we look into that. But I agree that, of course, sort of if you think about the repayments and the interest cost of that sort of we are facing, then this squeezes the overall envelope. That's trivially true. But I think one has also to say, we knew that, This was a decision by the member states, by the European Union to do this. So we knew this would eventually sort of happen. So I think we have to try sort of to be really creative in accommodating these challenges. You're not happy with this answer, I know.
No, it's very well reflects your position. So Giancarlo, if I ask you to very briefly.
Yeah, so I think Stefan said something important at the beginning. Should have also said the budget is one of the instruments, and there are many other instruments. Now, if I look at my 20, 30 years of teaching, studying European integration, remember with Padoskiop, we talk about subsidiarity. Subsidiarity was a concept, very abstract, now it's becoming much more articulated, and this budget is, I think, an advancement on the idea of subsidiarity and engagement with the member state, which is not over yet, but it is the current discussion. We talk about public goods, we talk about externalities, network externality, We talk about stabilization, not only because of COVID, but because of the great shortfall of coordination of national fiscal policy during the crisis. All this we learned, and there is a lot of the learning there. There is an issue here. One issue is the fact that the world is changing, and the cheap money period is gone. This is an issue. It's a new regime, which is hopefully not exacerbated by bad policies, but it's there. The second issue is the fact that if you take the dynamic view of Europe, Europe is a fragile continent. I mean, everybody now thinks about defense. How stupid we were to ask the US to our defense, because in a way defense was a great engine of innovation and growth. So we delegated to the US for 3, 4, 5 decades innovation, and now because we were like sort of looking backward, we could say, look, there is certain public goods that are dynamic. So defense is unfortunately one of those. Climate change is an opportunity for investment, is a cost for a society because more resources go into. So what I'm saying is the fact that if you take a little bit of a dynamic view of the instruments and the engagement with member states, there is clearly a new covenants here coming. I hear Stefan very well. I don't come from a country with a lot of fiscal resources. What I see is a danger, which is the asset that we have, which is the single market, the scale, the minimum coordination of smart things, may fall victim of different positions, fiscal positions, a desire for financial repression that may come from treasuries that need the money. So all this, I see the budget, when I say flexibility, or I saw the budget as a way in which there are areas in which the budget can show that European coordination, consistency can do better. Not always. Actually, I would avoid to go to places where there is a cheap criticism, because at the point it would be self-defeating. But if we, let me just make one comment. I made the comment on defense. Think about an aging society. What it means to delegate to the US and the price system of the US and the monopoly price of the US, all the digital imagery in health, all the pharmaceutical, all the robotics. So all these are things. If we want to save the welfare state in Europe as we have, there is a productivity challenge there. And I'm not sure there can be much at the European level. Nothing to do with the budget? Maybe. There could be aspects where the budget can be the catalyst, can be the example, can be the sort of way forward, like small experiments that can show how things. In the sense, I say that it was small, it's big in absolute, but clearly it's not delegating all these things to you.
Many thanks. I do think, and also I think many of people would also believe that the EU budget should also have at least some role in fostering productivity. But let's now open the floor for questions. So there are also lots online, but first I would like to, I see many, so many hands. I don't know who is bringing the microphone. Is there someone who is bringing the microphone? Where to start? I mean, let's start maybe on the back row, because people were patiently standing. So please introduce yourself and be very, very brief. So 30 seconds, because there are many, many questions. And I ask all three of you to take notes. And then we have one round when all three of you will have a chance to respond.
Thank you very much, Jakub Grzeszkowski, BG. I would like to ask about the national regional plans. The idea has been evolving as we were trying to figure out what is the, starting from the discussion last year when you mentioned the very beginning of the idea and then how it was evolving. I see that you were listening carefully the reactions from around Europe. How important this idea is for the Commission, taking into consideration pretty loud criticism coming, for example, from the European Parliament. Can you imagine that this part of the proposal would not materialize, and the cohesion policy, the common agricultural policy, which will end up much closer to the current management and architecture, rather than the proposal that you've placed? Thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
Thank you very much, Jarosław Rytas. The only relevant part of my biography relates to the fact that I have negotiated on behalf of Poland financial perspectives 2005. And I have heard many of the arguments similar during these debates and discussion between member states as well. My question goes to Stephanie Risso concerning own resources, because it's very easy to say, but some of these own resources looks like a bit evaporating. They have to meet criteria. They have to be either not really attributed to a member state, like tariffs, where they could be collected on the common frontier, or they have to be quite equally dispersed among member states, that because member states do calculate how much they contribute, even indirectly via own resources. In my team at that time, there was a young gentleman called Piotr Serafin, who was precisely with this task, to calculate how we will contribute with their own resources to the EU budget. So my question is, which kind of new resources you can still consider? Because maybe there are some more than those who are in proposal. Because those who are in the proposals might not be executed. So do you have any ideas whether there will be some more socially acceptable own resources that could be still explored?
Johannes Lindner, Jacques Delors Center in Berlin. First of all, quick a positive echo, and I'm saying this from Berlin, that I think these structural elements, the focus on flexibility as well as on competitiveness, is probably the biggest and boldest reform since 1988. So in that respect, I think I would have liked a different proposal, more ambitious, but I think you also should be praised for what you've done in these two areas. So a quick follow-up question to the issue of national and regional partnership plans and on the governance, because I think there is still a lot to be specified further. And I want to zoom in particular on this issue of co-shared management. So you will have national governments assessing performance of national governments, of member states. So if you could explain this a little bit more, I think that would be good, because people are still a bit puzzled on how would that work, especially with the RRF model in mind. And then a linked question to that, I read the proposal very much as a bit of a tit for tat. So on CAP and cohesion, you give more flexibility to the member states, but at the same time, in terms of European instruments like the Competitiveness Fund, you also want member states to go along by emphasizing the strengthening the European instruments. My fear is, and if I may, in particular after I listened to Stefan Imhoff, and I'm curious on your views on that, how do you get the member states buy-in in that tit for tat to say, in the end, it's not the agricultural lobby, the cohesion lobby that says, okay, there are no cuts. And then it's in the end, the European instruments and the Competitiveness Fund that will be pushed under the bus.
Hi, this is Saim Said from Bloomberg News. This question is for Stefan Imhoff. The Commission's proposal on new own resources includes e-waste, a call rate on tobacco excise, and a lump sum contribution as some of the new own resources. And to sort of phrase your own language, are these good own resources or bad own resources?
Hello, thank you very much. Just a question. Do you have in mind that there is a very simple and quick solution for the global decarbonization, which would be very positive for the public finance of the EU and of all the member states? Because currently, in terms of the budget, the current measures are negative. And this is a complementary measure to ETS and CBAM with very positive consequences in terms of public finance of the EU and the member states. And clearly also to have very quickly and efficiently the global decarbonization. So if you want, I could explain to you that complementary measures, of course, probably not now, but I don't know if you have it in mind, because this is something on which I'm working in Digitrade, and this is not a border tax measure. It's an internal measure in the EU, which would be very positive for the purchase power of the households, for our growth, for the industrial base, and for the public finance.
Hi, this is Gregorio Sorger from Politico. I have a question for Stephanie Rizzo. I'll be very quick. Because one of the big ideas of the budget was to have a stronger tie between the fulfillment of big macroeconomic reforms and payments. To what extent do you think that this logic has survived the negotiations in the Commission and in the actual proposal? And can you clarify whether the earmarked funding for farmers and for poorer regions will come with broad macroeconomic reform links or more specific related policy links?
Thank you so much. Okay, one more.
So apparently Europe needs a lot of funds to overcome the challenges for the years to come. So, well, having this sort of question, have you ever considered to tax directly the European taxpayer, since the rest of the needs and the vital public goods are at the European level? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So our time is just up. I would raise two questions from the online audience, and maybe one for Stefan would be perhaps better positioned to answer. Namely, exempting all EU contributions from the indicators for EU fiscal rules, because you said, you are saving 1,000 euros, so how can you pay 0.2% GDP more? But what if all EU budget contributions are completely exempted from the EU fiscal rules? I believe it wouldn't endanger that sustainability. And another one, to anyone who wants to answer. So there's lots of flexibility, agility, no one size fits all. But the person online asked, how do we ensure that there's still a secure control of all the money spent when not everything is free, but there is a great degree of flexibility. So lots of questions. I think most of them for Stephanie to answer. Not all. Okay, so maybe we start with you, Stephanie, and what you leave out, maybe ask Giancarlo and Stefan to try to respond.
Okay, I think the breadth of the questions actually reveals, the different trade-offs of any budget proposal, actually. So, on resources, I think own resources is very close to schizophrenia. So what happens with own resources is that everybody agrees. I haven't never ever met one person saying, "Oh, we don't need own resources. This is no good. We like good own resources, and everybody wants own resources." Now, genuine on resources, true on resources, good on resources. What is that? If the mandate is we need to finance the EU budget more by own resources, so outside direct GNI contribution, but you should not create new taxes. You should not create taxes on citizens or on business. And you should not divert taxes that exist already at the member state level, then I have no answer. That's very clear. We have, I believe, the college believe, quite a number of true, genuine, real own resources in our proposal. And I start with one, which is ETS. ETS, climate change, can only be tackled at the EU level. We all agree with that. ETS was set up by EU law, did not exist before. It should be a true, genuine own resources by all, at least academic theoretical features of what the own resources is. We tried, and up until now failed on own resource, ETS based. So the reality of it is not, and let me put it, maybe that's my personal view. Let me put a bit of a blunt statement. I think genuine good own resources is like beautiful or like ideal, you know. No one sees it the same way because it has redistributional impact, that's for sure. But I think when we look at the overall equation, and we should look at the overall equation, we cannot look at own resources, of course we will, but we shouldn't look at own resources on an individual basis or even just on the revenue side. The budget is both expenditure and revenue. So when we look at distributional impact, and I agree with you fundamentally, especially since my boss was in charge of it at the time, the reality is that the distributional impact should be both on revenue and expenditure. And that is why maybe there is a hope that we can discuss or rediscuss or start discussing proposals that existed before that have not been accepted at the time because they were in isolation of the expenditure side. So I think all own resources proposals that we have now are actually extremely defendable. Whether they are more, yes, they are more, everything. I think this time we have proposed more candidates that we have ever proposed cumulatively over the last, I don't know how many MFF. So the choice is large, but the choice at the end is one. If one own resources fail to be accepted, then the choice is binary. Either member state will have to chip in more of national contribution, we have heard Stefan, or it will have to be replaced by another own resources, or we will have to lower the expenditure side. Very simple. And the choice will be member states collectively. National reform, national, regional, and partnership plans, the governance of it, we will have long discussions on that, and I'm happy to walk you through all the details. The basic of it are, one, the regions get the same role as today, and I really want this to be stated because that's the case. It's been under a lot of misunderstanding. It has the same role as today. The national and reform partnership plans can be anything from a single national plan if member states chose so, and I think if I'm not mistaken, for example, Austria today has this set up for this own cohesion policy, so a single plan for the entire country, not by regions, or a full collection of regional plans, and everything in between is possible. How is it going to be organized exactly internally in the member states? Well, according to their constitutional setup, they will decide. What we will be discussing at the EU level will be a plan that will reflect this and the diversity of the situation in different member states. The requirement is consistency. It will have to be consistent with the EU priorities and with the recommendation that would have emerged. So it's not a fixed regime that we impose on the 27. Each 27 will have its own, but the requirement for then interacting with the EU level are spelled out in the proposal. Will the NRPP survive, or cohesion, or argue? I don't know. It's only my second day in office that let me believe that this proposal will survive, but more. Is the college behind it? It's a full college proposal. Everybody stand by it. It's been very much discussed and endorsed and approved and defended, and will continue to be. Flexibility controls. This is a very important point. Flexibility does not mean you do what you want. Flexibility means that you do not allocate everything from day one. So there is a pot of money which is not allocated and that you can tap into to actually enlarge your financial support on existing programs, use for new programs, etc. But everything follow all the same governance and the same rules. So it's not free money. And this is very important. Flexibility means, and this will mean, and let me finish with that point. This budget proposal is changing the balance between the MFF, the 7-year, and the annual budget. The MFF used to fix everything for 7 years, leaving very little to the annual budget to decide on. This proposal is different. We don't fix everything in the MFF, meaning the annual budget will become much more powerful in deciding the allocation of money to existing programs or to new ones. So actually, the role of the budgetary authority, Parliament and Council, is increased very much compared to the situation today. At least the volumes that they will have to decide on, it would be, according to a proposal, much larger than that they have today. So this is full democratic scrutiny on the annual budget, and large capacity to decide along the 7 years on the priorities, and rightly so, because we don't know for the next 7 years. And that's one point which has not yet been picked up, quite the opposite actually, but that's the reality of it. If you leave more space for decision in the annual budget, you leave more space for the Council and the Parliament to decide on an annual basis about what the EU budget is financing and how much the EU budget is financing. I have spoken too much already, so I stop here.
Thanks so much for your very careful answers. Giancarlo, is there any point you would like to respond?
Yeah, two sentences. The first one is that some colleagues of mine, without any habit of underestimating themselves, call it the new fiscal policy, new London consensus, in which this flexibility principle goes more clearly into contingency, contingent plans, into insurance, and also something that came out clearly in the COVID time, which is the guarantees, like the use of equities for programs. This is something that raises a lot of eyebrows, but it could be a way to also expand on the public and private partnership. You know, you basically enter. But the second thing I want to say is the following. I may be naive, but I have the feeling that in politics, you kill each other on the budget, and you forget about the spending. Now, the European budget, it creates a new subtle principle, which is to say, we want to know what you did with the money. And that is a same principle of democracy, in the sense that people will run, will promise, and will deliver, and we have to testify that So this is something that is one of the small reforms that can be revolutionary. There is a concern with the ability to do so. But if you really can think of Europe as something that creates a system that is transparent, that is shared on how to verify the correspondence between the plan, which doesn't fit all, that is very region specific, that you do what you want, but whatever you want, you show that you did. That would be one of the small revolutions that will be extremely consequential in a way for public finance, especially at a time of scarce resources.
Excellent. And Stefan, the last words are yours.
Thank you. I think there were 3 specific questions addressed. The first was on the flexibility and how member states would have to deal with that. If I understand it correctly, I think there's something important in what you said, because there is a shift from sort of negotiating on European level to negotiating on member states level. So the short answer, if I understood it correctly, to your question is, yes, it might be more challenging for member states implementing a budget with more flexibility, because we have to deal with it on the national level. So that's my understanding of this element of the flexibility. On the second question, I had to look into my instructions, so I was just sure that on what is good and what is bad. Now, I think if you take waste and tobacco, I mean, waste is sort of something like a statistical thing that sort of then allocates some cost to the member states. Tobacco is a tax increase on a national level, and then sort of we transfer the money to the EU budget. So they are not so good. because they don't tick the boxes we have. But I completely agree with you that sort of everybody says sort of let's have good own resources. It doesn't make it wrong though. Just because we always repeat it, it's not false. But I see what you mean. The lump sum on companies is in so far more interesting because it ticks the box of a contribution from actors that benefit from the single market. So there is some element of this ideality to it, at least. But I think we have to really go into the details of each proposal. We anyway, as I said before, so that we can't look into their own resource and the funding and the revenue side exclusively without sort of looking at the same time at the spending. But this would be sort of my idea on that. So if we would, if you look at the good things, like is ETS obviously, yeah? The good thing is CBAM. Yeah? That's the good things. Then the last question: exempt contributions from the fiscal rules. Well, I mean, of course, statistically, it might help in sort of if you have an excessive deficit procedure, but the financing need doesn't disappear. You know, it's not that you abolish the money because sort of you exclude it from fiscal rules. And then I think what is important to say is that we do not consolidate our budgets because there are European fiscal rules. We consolidate our budgets in order to regain sort of the space that we need in order to invest in important things in the future. And so whatever you you calculate in fiscal rules doesn't make our life easier because we anyway need the money. So I would say, I don't know, but sort of I have to finance it either way. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We ran over almost 50 minutes, but I believe it worth the time. And so I thank all of you who are here in the room, also those who are online, but especially our three speakers. So please join me in thanking them. Their great insight.